The wind howled. The sky grew dark as the clouds rolled in and gathered above us. Thunder rumbled and lightning flashed, and the rain began slanting and slapping our faces. Mercilessly tossed by the waves, the ship heaved and listed and creaked till it was impossible to distinguish the salt water of the angry sea from the pummeling pellets of the storm. This was no time to write letters home to pining lovers, no time to take stock of the supplies, and certainly no time to repair that small hole in the hull. No, the storm was upon us, and all thoughts of planning and preparation fled as the crew frantically but expertly straightened, battened, and secured all that was necessary for survival. A storm. A time of chaos and destruction. A time to circle the wagons, gather our loved ones, and cling tightly to the things and the people who are dearest to us. And then, once the storm is over, then it's time to recover and rebuild and repair. As the weather goes, so go our bodies, our businesses, and our lives. We are creatures who live in continual cycles of stress and recovery, stress and recovery. Stress, we know. If you were to Google the word stress, you would get over 17 million hits. We understand what stress is. We can find articles and all kinds of things that tell us how to eliminate stress, how to avoid stress, how to manage stress. We get that. Because it's not hard to recognize when our bank account is hovering precariously close to $0. It's not hard to recognize when a relationship is holding on by a thread. And we're all too familiar with the physical symptoms that also go along with stress. Headaches, depression, sleepless nights, stomach aches. We are familiar with stress, but our bodies and our minds are not built to maintain that pace for very long. In fact, we were created to live in a perfect balance of stress and recovery. Take our muscles, for example. Anyone who knows anything about bodybuilding knows that you don't work the same muscle 2 days in a row. In this example, on day 1, work chest and biceps. Day 2, legs, triceps, and abs. And then there are some days for rest. Bodybuilders know that it's not building the muscle up on the day that you're exercising it. In fact, exercising a muscle puts stress on it and actually tears the muscle down. It's the following day of recovery that's crucial to the muscle getting stronger and bigger. Muscles grow because of the stress, but not during the stress. Children. How many of you have children who have awakened you in the middle of the night with growing pains? And you say to yourself, why can't they grow in the daytime when I'm already awake? Right? It seems like they only grow at night, but they do only grow at night. In fact, children's bodies are very busy during the day. They're digesting food. They're hitting their siblings. They're climbing on play structures. They're learning things in school. They're very, very busy. And it's at night when their bodies are resting and recovering and sleeping that they're able to grow. I had a friend years ago whose son had a growth hormone deficiency. He wasn't nearly as big as the kids his age. So they went to a specialist, and they got some shots for him, and the prescription was very, very specific. When the child was in bed, about to go to sleep, that's when he was to get his shots. That's when they would be the most effective because children grow at night when they're sleeping. This is why rest and recovery is so important, not just for children, but for adults too. If we have too little stress in our lives, our muscles atrophy, and we don't have that mental acuity that we need to bring our A game. But if we have too much stress and not enough recovery, our bodies will seek it out on their own. And this is why at the most inopportune times, people fall asleep at the wheel. We have immune systems that crash and we get sick. We have depression, angry outbursts that are inordinately large for the circumstance. We know what that's like, right? So this is what happens to our bodies and our emotions. How does this apply to business? Well, primarily, if we're not taking care of our bodies and our emotions, we're not bringing our best to work, are we? And then, some of us may have seasonal businesses, and you understand this rhythm. Accounting, retail, construction. But everybody can understand that there's a certain ebb and flow, a certain rhythm that goes with business. There are times when you're able to kind of look around, assess your situation, make some plans, you've got the staff that you need, and everything seems fine. There are also times when it's chaotic. There's an emergency, or for whatever reason, good or bad, you just can't barely keep your head above water. That is the time that we need to examine some things. We do grow and we learn because of stressful times in our lives, but we don't often grow and learn while we're in them. Growth is determined by how well we prepare ourselves between the storms. The prepositions are very important here. You know that about me, right? Right? In those times when it's stressful at work, we may be looking around asking ourselves, how did I get into this situation? Why is this happening to me? And we also might be spending inefficient time making rash, illogical, or emotionally based decisions. Maybe that's only happened to me, but I don't think so. Thank you for that. All right. So if growth is determined by how well we prepare between the storms, wouldn't it be powerful if we could grab hold of a way to live our lives and run our businesses intentionally and proactively in such a way that when the next storm comes, we wouldn't panic and fall apart like we never saw it coming? So I'd like to share with you 4 principles today that I have learned that are very helpful in preparing between the storms for when the next one comes. The first one is to gather intentional momentum. And what I mean by this is really it's a mental perspective shift. There was a season several years ago when my husband went through a very challenging time professionally. And every morning as he walked out the door, he would say, well, let's see what fresh hell awaits me today. And I think by the groans that maybe you have lived through a season like this, right? There are times when you know no matter how early you get to the office, no matter how early you check your email, the best you can hope for is maybe catching up. But you'll never get ahead, right? And so to gather some intentional momentum means, what if instead of constantly burying our head in the details of our business, or putting out just the fire that's about to singe our eyebrows, what if we could make crisis management the exception to the rule and only an occasional activity? Stephen Covey talks about quadrant 2 activities. Maybe you've read this. These are the things that are very important, but they're not usually urgent. And they're things that are proactive, things like hiring proactively, things like having a business plan and then constantly assessing it and sticking to it. Things like planning and executing advertising campaigns, marketing. These are the things that won't scream for our attention. It's easy to find time for an emergency because it refuses to be ignored. But it's these activities that we push out and we have to plan for, and the success or failure of our business often depends on them, as does our sanity oftentimes. The second principle is to know yourself, which may seem a little bit indulgent, but during a crisis, we may act very intuitively and very organically, but it's often not the best of us. If we know ourselves well, then we can give some forethought to the kind of person we are, because in the middle of a crisis is not the time to say, I wonder what kind of personality I have. I wonder how I operate in a team. How would I deal with this difficult personality who's coming at me right now? Right? The time to assess those things is before it happens. One thing that you can do alone or as a team is something like a personality profile, Myers-Briggs, the DISC profile, Strengths Finders. These will help you to find out how you're wired, where your strengths and weaknesses are, so that you can build to your strengths and do damage control in the areas of weakness. Another crucial element to take care of so that you can know yourself between storms is that area of inner conviction and values. It's very difficult to build a business on inner convictions when you don't know what they are. And when a crisis comes and push comes to shove, it's much easier to compromise those values if they're not firmly in place to begin with. So this is a time to ask important questions like, what will I or won't I do to close the sale? Will I lie a little bit? Will I maybe steal an idea and creatively repackage it? We can ask questions like, how much margin is healthy in my calendar? What relationships are the most important to me, and how am I scheduling those? How am I protecting that time? And how am I investing in those people? When we're getting to know ourselves with an eye for future success, professionally and personally, it's not self-indulgent. It helps everybody. The third principle is to start with demolition, just like a good remodel. In a crisis is not a good time to take stock of some certain things. But in between crises is a great time to look around at the people, the environments, and the activities in your life that may be preventing you from living the whole healthy life you would like to live. Susan Scott is the author of a book called Fierce Conversations, and she asks CEOs a very important question when they're assessing and improving their businesses. She says, what are you pretending not to know? Professionally, it can be, I am pretending not to know that so-and-so is really not pulling his weight because I don't want to have to rehire and retrain. Personally, it may be as simple as, I'm pretending not to know that my late-night TV patterns are keeping me from being my best at my morning meetings. Or, I'm pretending not to know that what I'm having for lunch is definitely affecting my wardrobe. These are the things, just like on HGTV, a good remodel starts with demolition. So we've got to get rid of those 1980s countertops and have important conversations with ourselves. The last point is to plan for future storms. I don't mean to be fatalistic, but I can tell you with some degree of confidence that you have not encountered your last crisis. There is probably another one coming. But if we plan for the future storms, if we think about the last disaster, it can help us. You may be sitting here today saying, why on earth did I give away all of my Tuesday afternoon when I could be at the office? Because you know as soon as you leave, you will be inundated with voicemail, text mail, any kind of mail, snail mail. You're in a storm. That's a legitimate season. Some of you may just be starting your business. You may be in a calm, tranquil time. Congratulations, enjoy that. But I can also tell you that a storm is coming. And it may not be huge, and it may not be soon, but no one has smooth sailing forever. So think about your last disaster. Maybe your relationship fell apart. Maybe it was financial. Maybe you handled a client really poorly. Maybe life just handed you some lemons, right? It doesn't matter whether it was because of your bad choice or a poor decision that someone else made, or if it's just because we live in a world where stock markets crash and tsunamis destroy lives. Either way, if we look at a past storm and keep an eye on future storms, knowing that one is coming, chances are we can be far more prepared. I want to end today by telling you a story about a king. His kingdom was in the Middle East in the 9th century BC. His name was Asa. And he inherited a kingdom at peace from his father. His father had subdued all the surrounding nations, so Asa was able to go around his kingdom and assess and evaluate. And he saw that there were some pretty shady activities going on. Activities that were not conducive to a strong and unified kingdom. So he did some demolition work. Then he turned his attention to the cities and the walls around the cities. And he fortified them and he built them up. And then he gathered an army. And he had an army of over 500,000 soldiers, all men of skill and valor. And this was his pattern for about 10 years. Then the king of Ethiopia came with an army of over 1 million soldiers, chariots, and advanced weaponry. In every way, Asa was outnumbered and outclassed. But he'd been preparing for just such a time. The battle was fierce, but Asa's army was victorious. In fact, the battle was so decisive that not a single Ethiopian soldier was alive after the battle. And do you know why? Because Asa had intentional momentum. He had been building for 10 years for just that moment. He had also gotten to know his army, his kingdom, and himself, and he knew the strengths and weaknesses, and he knew what to do about them. He did a lot of demolition and got rid of all the distractions so he and the other leaders could focus on defending the city and building up a military. And finally, he knew that a time like this would come, so he planned for it. And they trained, and they got as much equipment as they possibly could. What if this could be us? What if we could transition easily in our businesses and in our lives between seasons of stress and recovery? And what if we treated our circumstances and our employees and our clients and all our relationships deliberately and purposefully? This guy, right here, you can see his name, he's a Confucianist philosopher, and he said, human nature is evil, and goodness is caused by intentional activity. Could there be a kernel of truth in this? That when we consider without intentional activity, human nature leans toward zealous overworking to the point of exhaustion or plain old sloth and procrastination, right? But what if we were prepared between the storms, knowing that another one was coming? Because once the storm comes, once the rain comes, it's too late. All you can do is use what you've learned before and hunker down and weather the storm. So my challenge to you today is to assess your season of life right now. You may be in a season when you can take some of these nuggets and you can put them to work right away and put them in place. You may not be in that season right now, and that's okay. I would challenge you to put this in a place where you can reach it again, because the clouds will part and the sun will start shining again. Thank you. I have a moment or two if anybody has any questions. Well, yes, thank you, Jessica.
Of those four things, do you think there's any of them that hold more weight than others, or are they equal in 25 percentages?
It would probably depend on the person. For me, I wouldn't do anything until I had determined my inner values and convictions, because to me that drives everything else that I do, but someone else may find something else to be important. Yes?
Jenni, for you, have you, in your demolition, what have you demolished?
Well, several years ago, I was very convicted, because I have inner convictions, about getting rid of soap operas. When my son was a baby, it was ruining my day. I would be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that baby is awake right now. General Hospital is on. And it was really affecting, but I was pretending not to know. I was like, come on, it's my one indulgence. It's in the middle of the afternoon, whatever. So that was a while ago, but it was a very specific one to say, I'm pretending not to know that this is not making me crabby, but on Saturday morning when I wake up and say, I wonder what so-and-so's doing. Oh, they're not real. That was affecting me.
Yeah.
That was a problem. So I feel like that's a safe one to share. Yes.
Can you give an example of either from your own entrepreneurial life or those that you've worked with, a nice example of a complete demolition, what that looks like?
Well, I think I can't give an example that I know of personally, unless it's kind of along the lines of what I just talked about. Personally, in our family, we have had some issues within the family that caused us to sell a house and move. That was pretty big. I don't know that that was demolition, but it was a lot of big changes and different schools and those kinds of things.
From a business standpoint.
I think employees are a huge one. I'm pretending not to know that my sales manager is not pulling his weight, or I'm pretending not to know that this issue you and I have is not really affecting us. Because in this book, Fierce Conversations, which I highly, highly recommend, she says we're not burnt out because we keep having conversations. We're burnt out because we're having the wrong conversations. And I think that fits into that category to say, I have to demolish this toxic relationship, whether it's professional or personal. Those, I think, can be the most insidious and get in the way of really being healthy people in general. I don't know if that answered your question. It felt good to say it, though, so. I hope that's helpful. Yes.
How does one discover their fierce convictions and values?
Oh, I love that question. That could be a whole other talk. I have found it very helpful to do periodic retreats by myself. Some people have a a belief system, a faith system that helps to define what some of those are. But I used to, for several years, I would go right after the first of the year, and I would spend 24 hours, or maybe just a day, depend on how long, morning till evening, and I would just get alone with a journal, not take a phone, not take a Walkman, because that's how it tells you how long ago it was, not take any music, but really just go for a walk. There are retreat places that you can go to, and really just think, what am I going to do this year? What am I about? What went well last year? What didn't go well? And really evaluate, because I think there's no substitute for the solitude to do that work, personally. Okay, may have time for one more question. Or you can come have a drink with me after the show, and lots of questions. Okay, thank you so much.